For generations, riders trusted engines, from Harley-Davidson, Indian, Honda, and Kawasaki, to go the distance without drama. That trust wasn't marketing. It was earned on the road. But today, something has changed. Behind the scenes, service bays are tearing down modern engines earlier than expected, and finding the same internal failures repeating across brands. Different bikes, different riders, same story inside the cases. There are no recalls, no headlines, and no warnings, just quiet repairs and expensive surprises. This isn't panic, and it isn't rumor. It's a shift most riders never see coming. Watch until the end, because once these engine disasters are fully exposed, you'll understand why long-term ownership doesn't mean what it used to, the assumption that still guides buyers. Riders did not invent the belief that certain motorcycle brands build engines meant to last. That belief was earned over decades of miles, maintenance, and stories traded in garages and parking lots. Machines from earlier eras developed reputations for starting every morning, pulling hard when asked, and surviving long past what the brochure ever promised. Those reputations hardened into assumptions, and assumptions quietly turned into buying habits. For many riders, memories of dependable platforms are not abstract. They are measured in cross-country trips completed without drama, in odometers rolling past milestones with nothing more than routine service, and in engines that felt familiar even after years of use. Reliability became part of identity. A badge on the tank was more than branding. It was shorthand for trust. That trust still guides decisions today. When riders walk into showrooms, they carry those memories with them. The expectation is not perfection, but endurance. Not innovation for its own sake, but continuity. The assumption persists because it always has, and because for a long time it was justified. Few people questioned it, because experience rarely gave them a reason to. It became the baseline against which every new machine was judged. And that baseline quietly shaped expectations for generations. That belief only works if the evidence still supports it today, now. How modern engines are still sold. Modern engines are not sold by arguing against the past. They are sold by invoking it. Language around refinement, evolution, and heritage fills brochures, websites, and showroom conversations. Words like improved, updated, and advanced suggest progress without forcing buyers to question durability. The message is subtle. This is the same lineage, only better. At the dealership level, improvements are often framed in terms of comfort, performance, or technology. Conversations focus on smoother delivery, cleaner operation, and updated features. Longevity is implied, not examined. Few sales discussions linger on long-term wear or service life, because those topics feel settled. The past already answered them. Trust, once earned, tends to operate quietly. Riders are not encouraged to interrogate claims they already believe. Familiar names do the work. Familiar shapes reinforce it. The assumption becomes background noise, present but unnoticed, guiding decisions without demanding proof. It feels unnecessary to question what has never failed you before, especially when the presentation feels respectful of tradition. That comfort is powerful, and it lowers the instinct to look deeper. As long as everything seems familiar, skepticism stays parked at the door. And for a while, nothing appears to challenge that comfort. Trust holds until patterns begin to form. If this breakdown is changing how you see these engines, take a second to support the work. Like the video, subscribe for deeper coverage, and share your experience below. Early warning signs, riders dismissed. Early reports of engine trouble did not immediately trigger alarm. Isolated failures have always existed, and experience teaches restraint before drawing conclusions. A single story rarely outweighs years of dependable ownership. Riders learned long ago not to panic at the first complaint. Experience, however, can cut both ways. Familiarity breeds confidence, but it can also soften suspicion. When something goes wrong, the instinct is to explain it away. Maintenance is questioned, usage is reviewed, conditions are blamed. The benefit of the doubt is extended again and again. Over time, small explanations accumulate. What began as curiosity becomes routine. Conversations shift from surprise to troubleshooting. The abnormal starts to feel normal, not because it is acceptable, but because it has been rationalized. Forums, service counters, and casual conversations absorbed these stories without urgency, treating them as noise rather than signal. Trust encourages patience, and patience can delay recognition. By the time concern surfaced, many had already adjusted expectations downward. What once felt unusual slowly blended into the background of ownership. Nothing seemed urgent enough to demand a hard stop. That quiet tolerance lasted longer than it should have, because familiarity muted the warning signs. Reassurance became reflexive, even among those who usually trust their instincts. Then the volume stopped being ignorable, and silence finally gave way to attention and unease spreading across conversations everywhere. Now, when similar stories start sounding familiar. When similar stories began appearing under different badges, the tone changed. Loyalty encourages patience, but it struggles against repetition. Hearing one account is easy to dismiss. Hearing the same account wearing another name is harder to ignore. Complaints that once seemed isolated started echoing. Different machines, different owners, familiar outcomes. The common thread was not writing style or expectation, but experience repeating itself. Patterns became visible without anyone needing to connect them deliberately. At that point, the myth did not collapse loudly. It softened. Confidence gave way to quiet recalibration. Writers did not abandon trust overnight, but they began listening more closely. Assumptions were no longer automatic. They were conditional. Conversations shifted from defense to comparison, from explanation to observation. As repetition did the persuading, the comfort of certainty weakened, replaced by a need to pay attention. No one needed statistics yet to feel the ground moving. Experience began asking questions that habit could not answer. What had been taken for granted started demanding verification. The shift was subtle, but it was real. Trust did not vanish, yet it stopped operating on autopilot. Attention sharpened, and listening replaced assumption. That change set the stage for something measurable. Concern turns into reality when numbers appear, when repetition is counted, compared, and finally impossible to dismiss without explanation or denial from anyone paying close attention anymore. What service bays started seeing repeatedly. Service bays began noticing repetition long before any public discussion followed. Technicians described opening engines that showed the same internal patterns regardless of model badge. Teardowns revealed familiar wear locations, similar surface damage, and consistent failure signatures. What mattered was not how dramatic a single failure looked, but how often the same internal story appeared again and again on different lifts. Historically, serious internal failures clustered at very high mileage, or under obvious neglect. What changed was timing. Engines arrived for major work earlier than long-accepted norms. Not catastrophic explosions, but undeniable internal issues requiring deep disassembly. The age of the machine was no longer the defining variable. The mileage no longer matched expectation. Repetition matters more than severity, because it removes randomness from the equation. One failure can be dismissed as misuse or bad luck. 10 identical teardowns remove that luxury. Service bays operate on pattern recognition. When a technician can predict what will be found before a case is opened, the problem stops being anecdotal and becomes operational knowledge. These observations did not originate from a single dealership or region. They appeared independently, often quietly, shared between technicians comparing notes rather than escalating alarms. What mattered was consistency. The work orders looked familiar. The internal damage followed recognizable paths. The machines behaved as if following a script. The reality was observable, measurable, and repeatable. And repetition does not respect boundaries. Patterns do not stop at one shop, and they rarely remain contained. Why? These issues rarely become public recalls. Not every mechanical problem becomes a recall. Recalls require specific thresholds, defined safety implications, and formal acknowledgement. Many issues instead fall into quieter categories. Service campaigns, technical updates, and internal advisories address known problems without public announcements. The work still happens, but the language changes. Quiet actions shift responsibility without drawing attention. Owners discover updates only when seeking service or after a failure occurs. There is no announcement to prompt inspection. There is no public notice demanding awareness. The absence of noise creates the impression of absence itself. Silence, however, does not mean inactivity. Internal documentation exists. Part revisions appear. Updated procedures circulate through service networks. These changes are not secret, but they are not advertised. They live in systems most riders never see unless something goes wrong. This structure allows manufacturers to address issues incrementally while avoiding broader perception. It also fragments awareness. One owner learns nothing until visiting a service counter. Another discovers information buried in a work order. The picture remains incomplete unless someone assembles it deliberately. The reality is that problems can be widespread without being public. Records accumulate quietly. Updates leave traces. Patterns exist even when announcements do not. Information travels sideways, not forward. What remains unseen externally still generates documentation internally, and documentation leaves fingerprints. What is not public still leaves a paper trail. Cross-brand similarities that raised eyebrows. Independent observations became harder to ignore when similarities appeared across competing brands. Technicians working on Harley, Indian, Honda, and Kawasaki machines began describing failures that shared functional characteristics despite different designs. Components failed differently in appearance, yet similarly in behavior. Competition does not prevent shared problems. Manufacturers draw from overlapping supplier pools, similar engineering practices, and comparable production pressures. Differences in branding do not guarantee isolation in outcomes. When internal issues resemble each other functionally, comparison becomes unavoidable. These similarities did not suggest identical parts or designs. They suggested parallel results. Wear appeared where stress concentrates. Failures emerged where margins narrow. The machines did not break the same way, but they arrived at the same destination. What raised concern was not collusion or copying. It was convergence. Different paths leading to similar results indicate systemic influence rather than isolated error. When independent systems behave alike under load, the explanation rarely lives at the surface. The observations came from people with no incentive to exaggerate. They were not building narratives. They were comparing notes. Similar stories surfaced independently, often reluctantly, because acknowledging pattern meant questioning assumptions. Similarity across brands strips away brand-specific explanations. It demands examination beyond individual identity. Similarity demands explanation, whether comfortable or not. The line where normal wear stops making sense. Normal wear follows expected curves. Mileage accumulates. Components degrade gradually. Experience teaches where lines usually fall. The reality changed when those lines moved inward without clear cause. Usage alone stopped explaining outcomes. Mileage benchmarks that once indicated health began losing reliability. Engines reached thresholds that historically marked stability, yet displayed internal conditions associated with far greater use. This shift did not happen once. It appeared repeatedly enough to force reconsideration. At that point, explanation changes character. The language moves from speculation to diagnosis. Diagnosis does not assign blame. It identifies deviation. It asks why expected behavior no longer applies. When norms fail consistently, the norm itself becomes the subject. Technicians recognize this moment instinctively. It is when adjustments no longer restore confidence, when parts replacement does not address underlying behavior, when the same solution returns the same result. Diagnosis begins when familiarity breaks down. This line marks the transition from observation to inquiry. The reality is no longer whether something happened, but why expectations no longer hold. That question cannot be answered with usage alone. It requires examining conditions that altered the baseline. Once diagnosis begins, assumptions are no longer sufficient. Diagnosis leads to uncomfortable questions, and those questions do not remain contained. Time, pressure, replaced patience. Validation once happened on the calendar, not the launch schedule. Earlier eras allowed engines to accumulate time under controlled stress before release. Testing cycles stretched long enough for weak points to reveal themselves naturally. Failures appeared in controlled environments, not customer garages. That process did not produce headlines, but it produced durability. Over time, validation windows shortened. Development timelines tightened. Launch cadence became predictable, aligned to model years rather than mechanical maturity. Engines moved from prototype to production faster, carrying fewer accumulated hours of sustained operation. The reduction was not dramatic at first, but it was consistent. Endurance testing is invisible when it works. No one notices the failure that never happens. Its absence only becomes clear when patterns emerge later in the field. Without sufficient time under load, certain behaviors remain dormant. They do not announce themselves during brief evaluations or controlled cycles. They appear only after repetition. Time pressure does not break engines directly. It removes opportunities to discover what will. When testing compresses, risk migrates downstream. Validation becomes assumption. Assumption becomes exposure. The evidence here is not speculation, but process. Change. The calendar replaced patience as the governing force, and engines carried that shift quietly into service. Testing did not disappear. It changed shape. And that change altered what problems were allowed to surface early. Time pressure creates other compromises. Precision reduced. Mechanical forgiveness. Modern engines are built with tighter tolerances than their predecessors. Precision improved efficiency, consistency, and output control. Components fit closer together. Clearances narrowed. Variability decreased on paper. The system became more exact. Exact systems tolerate less deviation. Older engines survived abuse because they contained margin. Wear could occur without immediate consequence. Clearances absorbed error. Heat expansion remained within safe boundaries longer. Forgiveness was engineered into the design. Precision removes that cushion. When tolerances shrink, behavior becomes binary. Parts either remain within specification or they do not. Small deviations matter more. Slight changes in heat, load, or alignment produce measurable effects. The system performs better when everything behaves perfectly, and worse when anything does not. This is not failure of engineering intent. It is trade-off. Precision delivers benefits, but it narrows acceptable conditions. Longevity becomes dependent on uniformity. Every component must behave as expected every time. When one element drifts, the system responds faster and harder. Precision is strength when conditions remain ideal and controlled without deviation. It becomes liability when reality intrudes through heat, wear, or minor variation. The evidence lies in how systems respond to deviation, not in whether precision exists on paper. Precision only works when every part behaves identically, every cycle, every load, and every environment, without exception, across time, mileage, and use. Where margins shrink, tolerance disappears completely under pressure conditions. If you want continued coverage like this, subscribe before the next update lands. These stories move fast, and future breakdowns will build on what you just learned. Staying subscribed means you won't miss the details that quietly change decisions long-term. Supplier variability became a silent risk. Part numbers imply sameness. They suggest interchangeability and consistency. In practice, identical numbers can mask subtle variation. Materials differ slightly. Processes vary. Batches behave differently under stress. supplier networks evolved. Long-standing relationships shifted. New sourcing arrangements introduced additional variables. Parts met specification, yet behaved differently over time. Differences remained invisible until failure occurred. Batch variability does not announce itself during assembly. It appears later, under sustained load. Two engines built with the same components can age differently. The variation is not dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarms, but sufficient to influence longevity. These differences are difficult to detect upstream. Quality checks confirm dimensions and material properties within range. They do not simulate long-term behavior perfectly. Variability accumulates quietly, then expresses itself when combined with other factors. Sourcing decisions echo downstream because they affect consistency, not function. Parts work until they do not, often without warning. When tolerance shrinks, variability matters more than specifications suggest. Small differences accumulate under repeated load and thermal cycling. The evidence is not found in intent, promises, or documentation, but in outcome observed over time. Even parts that meet every requirement can fail when enough stress, heat, and repetition converge within a system. This reality surfaces regardless of brand, era, or reputation. Physics always collects its debt. Heat, stress, and output density govern engine behavior regardless of branding. Increasing output from familiar designs concentrates energy in smaller spaces. Heat builds faster. Loads intensify. Materials operate closer to their limits. Pushing designs further changes longevity, even when architecture remains familiar. The engine appears unchanged externally, yet internal conditions differ. Thermal cycles intensify. Stress accumulates differently. Wear accelerates in specific zones. Engineering limits cannot be negotiated. Materials obey physics, not schedules. When output density increases, margins shrink. Cooling capacity becomes critical. Lubrication tolerances tighten. Every system interacts more aggressively with the next. This does not imply recklessness. It reflects ambition meeting constraint. The evidence shows that when multiple factors converge, physics asserts authority. It does not compromise or delay. It collects its debt consistently. Once limits are reached, outcomes follow predictably, without drama or negotiation. The system responds exactly as designed, but that design now operates closer to the edge. When margins narrow, tolerance disappears, and small deviations matter more than before. That edge ultimately defines longevity, not intention or reputation. Once causes are clear, consequences follow in orderly sequence, revealing how systems behave when pushed beyond assumptions that once felt permanent, stable, and safely understood over extended operational cycles under sustained load conditions. Ownership costs changed quietly. Ownership costs did not change overnight. They shifted quietly, almost politely, in ways that avoided headlines, but altered day-to-day reality. Repairs began appearing just outside warranty windows, not dramatic failures, but expensive enough to matter. Parts that once arrived quickly now required waiting, sometimes measured in weeks rather than days. Downtime became normalized. Machines sat longer in service bays, not because technicians lacked skill, but because components moved through longer channels. The waiting itself carried cost, transportation, storage, and lost use, all absorbed without ceremony. None of this felt catastrophic. It felt administrative, procedural, and therefore easy to ignore. Expectations, however, were built on older experience. Riders expected certain timelines, certain thresholds, and familiar rhythms of ownership shaped by years of consistency. When those rhythms changed, the mismatch created friction that was hard to name. Nothing was technically broken in the process. Parts still arrived. Repairs still happened. Yet, the outcome felt different in daily use. Ownership required more patience than it once did, more waiting, more planning, and more tolerance for uncertainty. The machine still delivered movement, but the experience around it no longer matched the mental contract riders carried forward from earlier eras, and expectations followed slowly. The shift did not announce itself, it accumulated. Each delay, each out-of-window repair, quietly adjusted the equation. Over time, that adjustment became noticeable, not through one bill, but through repeated inconvenience. Reality moved, while expectations remained anchored elsewhere. What changed most was not the mechanical task itself, but the quiet certainty that ownership followed a predictable script learned over years. A script now rewritten without warning, explanation, or acknowledgement from anyone directly involved in daily riding life. Ownership costs ripple outward. Dealers absorbed the pressure. Dealers felt the shift immediately, even if customers did not. Service departments filled first, schedules tightening as routine work collided with longer, more complex repairs. Frustration arrived at the counter before it reached any executive office. Conversations became harder, not because of hostility, but because answers were limited. Reputation absorbed pressure that did not originate on the showroom floor. Dealers do not design engines, yet they stand closest to disappointment. When timelines stretch or outcomes disappoint, the brand face is local. That proximity carries weight. Trust erodes fastest where relationships exist. Structural strain followed quietly, not with headlines, but with accumulation. Floor space stayed occupied longer, turning quick turnover into extended holding. Loaner availability tightened, forcing harder conversations at counters. Staffing models built for predictable flow struggled under irregular demand and longer repair cycles. None of these issues appeared dramatic alone. Together, they reshaped daily operations, altering schedules, cash flow, and morale, slowly redefining how dealerships functioned without any single moment, signaling that change had already arrived for everyone involved locally. This pressure rarely shows up in reports, yet it shapes which dealers endure, which consolidate, and which quietly exit, leaving fewer local anchors, longer travel for service, and a thinner network that amplifies every future disruption. The effects compound, slowly, unnoticed at first, until capacity tightens, patience thins, and routine transactions begin carrying an edge that did not exist before in many communities across wide regions over extended stretches of time. Markets respond faster than brands. Buying behavior is already shifting. Buying behavior has already begun shifting, quietly and unevenly. Shoppers arrive better informed, asking narrower questions, focusing on specific years rather than broad model families. The casual assumption of equivalence has faded. Selection has become deliberate. Certain platforms attract renewed attention for reasons that have little to do with novelty. Comfort, familiarity, and documented longevity carry more weight than specifications. Proven layouts regain value simply by being known quantities. The appeal is stability, not excitement. Trust now operates selectively. It is extended to some versions and withheld from others. Buyers no longer grant benefit automatically across an entire lineup. They distinguish carefully, relying on accumulated experience rather than promise. The process takes longer, but it feels safer. This shift does not announce itself as distrust. It presents as caution. Conversations change tone. Decisions slow. The market adapts through thousands of individual choices rather than coordinated movement. Over time, those choices reshape demand. Patterns that once took years to surface now influence decisions early. As shared experience travels faster, archives persist, and memory extends beyond personal ownership into collective recall. This does not require agreement or consensus, only enough alignment to change how risk is perceived and how caution becomes the default posture across transactions, repeated daily in many regions, over extended stretches of time, together slowly everywhere. All of this points to one conclusion: the truth that doesn't need selling. The final truth does not require persuasion. This was not one bad engine or one unlucky run. It was a system operating under different priorities than it once did. The change happened gradually, without declaration. Longevity was not removed outright. It was traded quietly, one decision at a time, in ways that made sense individually. The result was not immediate collapse, but altered expectations. What emerged feels unfamiliar only because memory is long. Experience often recognizes shifts before documentation does. Patterns register intuitively, then slowly gather confirmation. When evidence arrives, it does not surprise, it clarifies. The distance between feeling and proof closes. This recognition is neither accusation nor apology, it is adjustment. Systems evolve, expectations follow, and understanding lags until evidence aligns. Once alignment occurs, clarity replaces argument. The result is not anger, but recalibration, a quieter state where assumptions are updated and attention sharpens for what comes next. It allows experience to regain its role, guiding judgment forward without noise, hype, or urgency over time through observation rather than reaction alone or assumption-based thinking. The story resolves without drama. What was trusted still deserves respect, earned through decades of miles and memory. What changed deserves acknowledgement, not denial or noise. Reality did not arrive suddenly. It crept forward until instinct finally met evidence. Nothing here erases the past. It simply updates it. Understanding replaces assumption when experience and proof finally align, allowing writers to adjust expectations calmly without panic, anger, or regret. That awareness shapes future choices and preserves respect for the machines themselves. This isn't about panic or trashing brands. It's about paying attention before assumptions get expensive. Engines change, systems shift, and writers have to adapt. If this connected with your experience, hit like so more writers see it, subscribe for deeper breakdowns, and drop a comment with the year, model, and miles you've seen. Real stories matter more than marketing.